What happened at a wedding that made it obvious that the bride and groom shouldn't be getting married? Are they still together? The groom drunkenly cornered my roommate and demanded a blowjob as a wedding gift. Apparently he was under the mistaken impression that all gay men are excited to give pretty much anyone a blowjob at any time. My roommate declined the invitation. Shockingly, that marriage did not last. Bride, who we all thought was a bit of a gold digger to begin with, laughed uncontrollably at the richer or poorer part during the rehearsal. Promised to get it together during the ceremony. She didn't get it together and burst out laughing again. She never said it. I mean, I started giggling at in sickness and in health because I have an autoimmune disorder, but my husband was giggling along with me. At the rehearsal we had said in sickness and in more sickness, but that was a joke that we shared because of all the crap we'd been through together. I can't imagine laughing at part of your vows like she did. The poor groom. My good friend was marrying this guy. We will call him Ned. Ned definitely had a drinking problem that everyone swept under the rug. He promised my friend he would keep it under wraps for the wedding. He made it down the aisle, but by the reception he was binge drinking. By then end of the night the groom Ned completely disappeared. No one could find him. A few nervous laughs turned into mild panic when the lights were turned on in an effort to find him. My husband decided to go look for him in the parking lot, where he finds Ned on his lips in the dirt. He had smoked a joint and got the spins. My husband tried to talk sense into him, reminding him this is your wedding, dude. He got Ned to come inside and did the most cringy walk of shame past the bride's family, who was very cross with him. Ned was supposed to drive them 11 miles from the venue to their hotel in bride's grandfather's vintage Corvette. He was too drunk to drive, so the bride's grandfather drove them and the bride had to sit on the middle armrest with no seat belts. Grandpa drops them at the hotel. Bride barely gets groom up to the room where he passes out on the bed. Bride had to wander the halls looking for someone to help her out of her wedding dress since her groom was passed out drunk. The word annulment was definitely floating around that next morning. As crushed as the bride was, she stuck it out. 3 years later they are now separated and divorcing because he is still a drunk. When the priest equivalent said you may kiss the bride, she turned so that it would be a kiss on the cheek. Even as a child that set off alarm bells. They have been divorced for a long time. My sister-in-law got married last fall, and after the ceremony they got in an epic fight over the marriage certificate and didn't come to the reception until 2 hours after it started. A week later, they separated for a few weeks while trashing each other on Facebook. They're still together and she's now pregnant. Dropping acid before your own wedding is a bold move. They got married after a 10-year relationship. The wedding was painful to watch as they had such a bad fight the night before. They barely spoke to each other all day, hardly looked at each other. They split up 8 weeks later. I know 3 couples who were together for over 10 years before getting married and none of them worked out. You'd think they'd have a good foundation in the relationship, but I guess getting married sets different expectations, and by that point, no one wants to change anymore. On their first dance, he kept trying to kiss her and she would avoid it very subtly. I noticed that and thought, I don't think she loves him. I wasn't wrong. They divorced within the first year. I saw the video of the first dance like this. My brother-in-law taped it and said this couple is getting divorced. Not even 3 months later they were divorced. He was caught doing coke in the car before the wedding started. The bride was pregnant at the time. They're still married. Fight constantly and now want another baby. They don't call it a white wedding for nothing. We were good friends with a couple who fought all the time. She wanted to get married desperately and he was indifferent. After years of nagging he finally proposed. On the day of the wedding, right before he walked out, he looked at us and sighed, well, maybe now she will stop nagging at me and finally be freaking happy. They are now divorced. She cheated on him with some guy she used to date. Why fight with him to marry her only to then cheat and get divorced? What a complete waste of time for both of them. The bride and groom both got coked up and got into some kind of argument over the bride wanting him to help her undo her dress. It ended with the groom beating the bride beyond recognition and being arrested. He was charged and given a restraining order and their marriage lasted 1 day. At a friend's wedding 2 years ago, the bride kept the bar open until 3 AM after the groom went home at 10 PM. She kept telling everyone that she is just with him because he has money and a flat. They are now going through a divorce after she cheated on him. Tale as old as time. My friend made up excuse after excuse why they couldn't legally get married, but still had the ceremony. They lost the officiant right before the ceremony because he said he didn't want to be a part of their place since it wasn't legal. Finally, after she ran out of excuses, she confessed she was scared to get married. They're still together but not legally married still. It's been about a year. Other fun things that happened. Her grandmother broke a hip right after the ceremony and had to be taken out via ambulance. The ceremony was an hour and a half late. There was no rehearsal, so right before the ceremony the bride was panicking because she didn't know how to set up the wedding party. There were Hamil's dogs running around unattended. It was supposed to rain, 95% chance, and she knew the day before, but instead of planning ahead she hissed, "Just pray it doesn't rain," when I brought it up. When it did begin raining right before the ceremony, there was no plan, and the bride refused to make any choices. The groom got horribly sunburned setting up in the morning. His face was very red. It was officiated by someone dressed as the Mad Hatter. Husband disappeared 2 hours into a 6-hour reception because he was bored. Just went into the house and hung out on his phone. It was a chill ranch thing with games and drinking and dancing. Adults only. Also, I didn't meet him until the wedding while me and the bride, hung out pretty frequently. So there was some lead up to that. Didn't help. He wasn't cheating, just watching golf videos. The dude doesn't get to decide what's boring if he went home to watch videos of golf. Not so much evidence that they shouldn't have been together, but evidence that my sil is just a horrible, thoughtless person. The wedding was supposed to start at 3 p.m. At 3, she was getting in a bathtub in her hotel room to unwind before starting to get ready. All of us bridesmaids were already ready. I had to call my mom and tell her that we were at least an hour out. My brother was there waiting already. Oh, and it was October, Halloween, around 40 and windy, and it was an outdoor wedding in a park with no indoor venue attached. Their poor guests ended up waiting more than an hour and a half. The divorce papers have been filed and should be final within a few months. During the cake cutting, he smashed cake in her face. She immediately started crying and went to the bathroom for about 30 minutes. Then they got into a huge fight and barely spoke the rest of the night. Shockingly, they are still married, but they still fight all the time. She's my friend from college, so we keep in touch occasionally. She never has good things to say about him. My mama has always said it's pretty telling how a couple behaves during the cut of the cake. I've always paid attention to that, and she is right. The level of respect they have for each other shows up better at this moment than any other. The groom had his car stolen on the morning of the wedding and spent the whole day swearing and punching inanimate objects because, as we all heard 1,000 times that day, not only was it the most important thing in his life, it also wasn't insured. The wedding was at a Boy Scout hall, for no apparent reason, and the reception was in the cafeteria at one of those underwater world places with the glass tunnel. But no one was allowed to go see the fish because, get this, the whole day had a Lion King theme. Then towards the end of the night, the bride beat one of the bridesmaids half to death because she caught her fricking a groomsman who she tearfully admonished for cheating on her. I have no idea how long the marriage lasted for. I never saw or heard from them again. My brother's wedding. It was super uncomfortable and awkward during their engagement. My parents kept asking him if he was sure. He said yes. Then came the wedding. Super small. When they said to kiss, they both went in for a peck, but she turned her face at the last minute, so he kissed her cheek. My husband yelled for them to do it again. I was also their wedding photographer and he knew I didn't get a good shot. The marriage only got weirder and worse from there. They acted like they were on an awkward first date every day. Finally, a year later, they divorced. While getting up the stairs, the groom stepped on the bride's gown. She turned and slapped him and called him blind. He turned the other way and left. Oof, good for him. About an hour before my cousin's wedding, she made the comment that her next wedding wasn't going to be as big and complicated. She was right, her second wedding was super small. Holy crap. I came here to post something similar. I was a bridesmaid in a wedding where the bride was planning her next wedding in the car on the way to the wedding. Everyone was completely silent before her maid of honor said, "Let's just get through this one." Bride got drunk and started screaming about how much she hated her in-laws. who were obviously within earshot. They lasted a few years, had kids, and unfortunately are spending thousands in a nasty divorce right now. Man, this sucks. I hate my in-laws too, but I'm always nice to them. Bride kept telling anyone who'd listen that she booked the wedding through Groupon and it was super cheap. They hadn't planned to get married until she saw the deal online. Not sure how long it lasted, but she posted a sarcastic comment about how successful her marriage was on Facebook on her first anniversary using the memories feature. Don't get me wrong, I love a coupon, but the most important decision I would make because I got a bargain is what to eat for dinner. It ended before a wedding took place because the bride admitted to cheating on him. The bride's family had already paid for the reception, so they had a family party where they trash talked the groom and ate the catering food. A wedding guest looking out of the window beamed at the groom waiting at the altar and said she's here, and the groom jokingly pretended to run away. It went down like a lead balloon because he had actually run away the previous year. Literally went out to the shops and didn't come back for 8 weeks. While she was pregnant with their first child, the bride's mother gave him a look that would have wilted the wedding flowers, and happy chatter in the room turned to frosty silence, just in time for the entrance of the bride. They are still together many years later and have had more children together, but I wouldn't describe them as happily married. The way you described the bride's mother's face was fantastic, lol. He was so hammered he could barely stand for his vows and they got in a huge fight at the reception. Lasted less than a year. Where I'm from, it's illegal to marry 2 people if one party, or both, are intoxicated. Source: Minister asked my dad if he was sure about marrying my mom at their wedding, because if he wasn't he could pretend he found out my dad was drunk, so he wouldn't be able to legally marry them. They are together still. 30 years. But my dad loves telling that story. The bride showed up late at her own wedding, crying and needing to compose herself because she just said goodbye to the other guy she was seeing. It lasted maybe 6 months. Why the frick do people do this to themselves? She was barely around during the reception and no one could find the bride. 2 weeks later she was already cheating on her husband. They were divorced in less than a year. Ouch. The wedding was fake. Bride and groom were quite young and dated happily for several months. Bride was in a hurry to settle down, I think to fit in with our friendship group who had or were doing the same, and pushed for engagement, and groom was reasonably happy to oblige but not ready to take the next step and wanted a long engagement. Bride began pushing to set wedding dates almost immediately. Groom's mother and father were unwell with both physical and mental health issues. Getting closer to the wedding date, groom made it known that he loved bride but wasn't ready to settle down yet. Bride wasn't having any of it and complained to her own immediate family about this, who start harassing groom's parents about how he's a dog, mistreating their daughter, etc. Groom agrees to go ahead with the wedding if bride's family leave his parents alone. Wife wasn't happy with this and called the celebrant to talk some sense into him. Celebrant refused to perform a wedding where one party wasn't on board. Bride insisted the event go ahead and that they pretend it was real, but with a bunch of guests who had been married or attended weddings recently, we all immediately noticed the celebrant didn't say the words legally required for marriage, and no paperwork was signed. Groom's parents refused to attend the reception, leaving table 1 half empty and not paying for the bar service. Guests took back their gifts. Bride and groom avoided each other the entire time except for a super awkward first dance. The whole thing was super surreal and awkward. They split up a couple of months later. She cared more about having a wedding than a marriage. Sad. Just as the processional music started, the groom's great uncle keeled over in the front pew and expired. Yes, the wedding went on after 45 minutes of futile CPR. Complete with a priest who included the uncle in every prayer. Lord, bless Jean and Jim, and Stanley. It was a bit of a downer, to say the least. And no, the marriage didn't last long. I was one of the bridesmaids in this wedding. The groom was a major jerk, very snobby and looked down on the bride and her family because they didn't have money. Because the bride's family didn't have much money and was paying everything they could for the wedding. It was very small, and we, the bridesmaids, did most of the decorating and setting up. Bride's dad was the pastor of the church, so we were able to get in and work on the reception room a day or two before the wedding. The entire wedding party was supposed to help. The groomsmen showed up, but no groom. He wasn't answering his phone. His parents couldn't find him. Groomsmen had no idea where he was. Just dropped off the face of the earth for 2 days. The wedding party looked like we were in 2 separate weddings. She wanted a turquoise blue as a wedding color, and he wanted gold. She wanted casual and comfortable. He wanted formal. So instead of either making any compromise, they each did their own thing with their side of the wedding party. The bridesmaids wore bright turquoise skirts and flip-flops. The groomsmen wore full suits with gold ties. In the photos, we look like 2 separate weddings who stumbled on each other. Bride's family was super conservative and didn't drink alcohol. Their church did not allow it on church property. Groom was basically still a frat boy. He legit worked for his fraternity for a year after graduation and couldn't stand the no alcohol rule. He got wasted in the parking lot before the ceremony and during the reception. Like we didn't know all of the groomsmen had full flasks of whiskey. I totally spiked my drink from one of the groomsmen's flasks, but I didn't get trashed or flaunt it. We had all spent considerable money being part of this wedding. Bridesmaid dresses, travel, hotels, etc. and agreed that if she called it off, we would happily eat the cost of everything and just be happy that she didn't marry him. But no, she said she couldn't call off the wedding since everyone knew they were getting married and had already arrived. Ugh. I've never seen a bride's parents look so miserable as their daughter got married, and her dad performed the ceremony. They lasted officially almost 4 years, but she left him maybe a year before that and moved into her own place. She was supporting him through the law school, and he treated her like crap, wouldn't let her meet his friends, occasionally hit her if she questioned him about something. We found his dating profiles online, which were absolutely wild. Her super conservative Christian parents offered to get her a divorce lawyer, and his family took her side in the divorce. That last sentence was very satisfying. I've attended quite a few weddings that have ended in divorce, and I swear you can tell at the wedding. I have attended all 3 of my uncle's weddings. With the first 2 it seemed to me that we as a family had more fun than the brides. The divorces both did not take long. The second wife literally permanently left the country and told my uncle not to follow her. She was a perfectionist and could not deal with the fact that my uncle's business was failing. My uncle is one of those guys with his head in the clouds, not incredibly ambitious, kinda like a puppy. Wife number 3 is great. He is happy. They had a kid. Both their first and basically what he has always wanted. Happy ending. One of those guys with his head in the clouds, not incredibly ambitious, kinda like a puppy. Same. I like to think of myself as a golden retriever. Well, the wedding was in his parents' lounge. It was a quickie wedding and she was 8 months pregnant, both very young. He paused partway through his vows and said, "I love my child, that's why I'm doing this." Then he cried. I tried to stop it, told him not to do it out of obligation to the child. He said he had to. She glared at me and his parents were furious at me. They got married, had 3 kids, cheated on each other all through their marriage. He's with someone else now and both have kids to other people. She's a single mom now, but he cheated on his new partner with her and they tried to make it work before giving up again and reverting back to him going back to his partner and her being single. They have a weird connection, I guess. Well, at her bachelorette party she broke down, drunk, and told us that she knew she shouldn't marry him and that she knew it wouldn't work. We begged her not to go through with it, but she did. On the day of the wedding, his uncle pulled him aside and said, "You don't have to do this," while counting out $100 dollar bills. The wedding was delayed due to a storm. This caused the bride to get angry and snap at everyone who even tried to talk to her. Finally the storm let up and the wedding took place. Mid-reception the bride angrily stormed out of the reception, and that kind broke up the festivities. No, they are not still married. She started cheating on her husband less than a year in and they divorced shortly thereafter. This was 15-16 years ago. He remarried a year or so later, and is still married to that woman. She just finished up her second divorce. I haven't talked to her in years because, well, she's a really toxic person who does not see how her actions contributes directly to her misery and I no longer live in our tiny hometown. so I don't have to be friends with crappy people I don't like that much anyway. I love the uncle trying to bribe him not to do it. I just imagine him looking like Michael Corleone with a couple of heavies behind him. Didn't know them personally, but there was a story in my town of the bride walking in on the groom sexually assaulting the maid of honor at the wedding, and they went through with the wedding anyway. Then said bride was the maid of honor at her maid of honor's wedding a week or two later, and I think it was sometime after this that the maid of honor reported the assault. I think this wins the most fricked up prize in this thread. The DJ kept playing sad breakup music the whole night. I thought it was hilarious at the time, but now they're 2 kids and are utterly miserable. Just end it already. A 3rd child will fix their marriage. Bride cried and looked so nervous during the ceremony. Saddest bride I'd ever seen. Marriage lasted less than a year. Spoke to her years after and she told me he'd been physically and mentally abusing her all the time. That's awful. I hope she is much happier now. Not at the wedding but at the practice run the night before. Bride and groom get in an argument because the bride doesn't want the groom to kiss her for longer than just a quick peck on the lips. Marriage lasted about 2 years. Some people just have different levels of PDA that they're comfortable with. One of my wife's sorority sisters got married recently. We're not that close and I don't know the groom, but every time I've seen her she's been belligerently drunk. At her wedding reception, she got blackout drunk and thought it would be funny to hide under a table, but then she spilled wine on her dress and started crying. New husband tried to get her to come back out and socialize and she ended up smashing a glass into his face and sending him to the air. She almost bragged about it when she told the story, like a no one tells me what to do kind of thing. They were going to get a divorce, but ended up getting pregnant instead. It's absolutely heartbreaking how many children are brought into the world in situations like this. For frick's sake, don't have unprotected sex with crazy. Bride's family looked super underdressed, except her brother, for her wedding, and she didn't have a father-daughter dance. She danced with her brother instead, and when they were dancing, she was tearing up. Her family also left early, again except her brother. The groom's family loved her and didn't understand why they didn't seem supportive. They are still together and just recently had their son. I'm glad she has a good support system with her husband's family. Sometimes people's families just suck. I have a few. Most obvious one was the bride getting caught blowing somebody other than her husband in the parking lot between the wedding ceremony and reception. And for part B, they aren't together. They weren't even together when the reception started. Try not to suck any dong on the way to the parking lot. So, I mean, at least she made it to the parking lot. Not to the wedding part yet, but my friend got engaged to his GF and not too long ago she told my fiancé, they are best friends, that she was going to the clinic to get an STD test and needed an alibi to hide it from my friend. Still don't know how to bring this up without completely destroying people's lives. If she tells her fiancé that she does have an STD and possibly gave it to her friend, you're really going to have a moral dilemma on your hands, lol. He overdosed about 2 years later. He went missing right before the reception to do a couple lines with his friends. We searched for him everywhere and had to postpone the entrance because we couldn't find him. So much stuff came out after his death. Even with his addiction issues, he absolutely loved and adored my best friend. I feel so sad to see how it all ended. Whoa, I've gotten some oh my gods and sadistic laughs from this thread, but this comment is so incredibly sad. I'm so sorry for your friend's loss there. Addiction is truly horrible. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.